I'm in Atlanta, the capital of Georgia, one of the most watched and nail-biting states in the 2020 election.
I've been standing in front of this board now for over a month, but this is it. This is the final after 3 counts. Joe Biden wins Georgia by 11,779 votes.
11,779. A margin of victory of just 0.23%. It was so close.
And it ain't over till every vote is counted. Every ballot is counted.
And that's why Donald Trump tried everything he could to
find 11,780 votes.
Eventually resorting to claiming the election was
Stolen.
Trump claimed there were fraudulent votes added to the count.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win.
Voters registered in multiple states.
Joe Biden could have voted 50 times, as far as we know, or 5,000 times.
Postal votes counted that shouldn't have been counted.
There's no way we lost Georgia. There's no way.
Let's be clear, Trump claimed that and is continuing to claim that without proof.
2020 election in the United States was not stolen. It was actually remarkably well run.
Donald Trump's giving us every reason to believe that he will challenge the election result again if he loses.
Will you accept the results of the election?
If it's a fair and legal and good election, absolutely.
In key states like Georgia, people who maintain the last election was stolen are now in positions supervising and certifying the next one.
This has been an ongoing assault on the electoral process.
It could set Georgia up to again be an epicentre of election court challenges in 2024.
We never forget 2020, just in case you have any questions. We're not forgetting 2020.
In this episode, is it actually possible to steal an election? And is it enough to run a free and fair election if people don't believe it was? I'm Casey Briggs, and we're continuing to ask, America, are you okay?
Hi, my name is Baoky Vu, and I served on the DeKalb County Board of Voter Registration and Elections for 12 years.
And who appointed you to that board?
Actually, it was the Republican Party in DeKalb County that appointed me to the board.
DeKalb County is the 4th largest county in the state, covering parts of Atlanta City, which made it a focus point for people seeking to overturn the 2020 election result.
The world is watching a handful of Georgia counties count votes, including DeKalb County.
This morning, the president once again calls out Georgia.
No Democrat has won this since 1992.
A win in any of the key battlegrounds left would put Joe Biden over the top.
We're all facing this gauntlet of lies and conspiracies, even from the elected leaders. You actually had the state Republican Party chair go out and tweet that somehow one of the polling locations had not, sent in ballots.
Baoky Vu had been on the county's Board of Elections for around a decade.
The implication was the fact that, do the right thing, do not be anti-Trump.
And in their minds, the right thing is what, declare Donald Trump the winner in your county?
That's right. That's exactly it. These folks refuse to believe what we are telling them. I mean, they're down a rabbit hole already. The rabbit hole was their election was rigged, and Donald Trump had been cheated.
There's no way we lost Georgia. There's no way.
Australia, like many countries, has a national electoral authority that runs national elections under one set of national rules. But back in the 18th century, the United States went a different way. It now has a decentralised system of thousands of electoral administrators. Whether intended or not, that's actually a safeguard against widespread electoral fraud.
Given the decentralization, you'd have to attack multiple places if you were trying to manipulate an election outcome. Given how important some of these states are, and given how much attention there is there, it'd be very difficult to do so without your efforts gaining some notice.
When the nation's founders wrote the Constitution, they gave authority over elections to the states, not the federal government. It's a clause in the Constitution known as the Elections Clause, saying the times, places and manner of holding elections for positions in Congress shall be prescribed in each state.
When the Constitution was written, it doesn't even define, who is an American citizen or who can vote. That was really left to the states. And we continue to live, with the legacy of that system to this day.
So when a voter walks into the polling place, they're going to face a ballot that may look different if they're voting in Atlanta compared to if they're voting in Los Angeles or Anchorage.
That's why today, if you live in Iowa, you need to show ID to vote. Just over the border in Wisconsin, you need ID with a photo. And if you live in Illinois, you don't need to show ID at all. States also have different sets of rules for mail-in ballots and early voting. It's a patchwork of rules that are hard to keep track of, and it doesn't seem likely to change.
After the problems with the 2000 election between George Bush and Al Gore, there were attempts to make changes to make the election system better. And this provoked large outrage among state and local election administrators who didn't want to see their power taken away.
With elections being administered at the county level, there's plenty of opportunities to gum up the works.
And what took 200 years to build seemed extremely fragile in a very short time frame.
There's a huge amount of fragility in the system. It's how we translate the moment when voters cast their ballots until the moment that Congress meets to determine who the Electoral College winner is. That's where there is some vulnerability.
There's just a lot of steps in the process. Take the presidential election. The local county tabulates the result, deals with any complaints and challenges, and then certifies them. The county then passes the results up to the state election authorities. The state government adds up the results in all of the counties to come up with statewide totals and a winner, and that gets certified. That determines a slate of electors that cast their votes in the Electoral College, and that then gets passed up to the National Congress, which certifies the national result on January 6th. At least, that's what's supposed to happen.
Mundane would have been the word prior to 2020.
And we fight. We fight like hell.
This was seen in the past as a ministerial act. That is something that an official did without having any discretion.
Pursuant to the Constitution and the laws of the United States.
But Trump leaned on some of these people to try to get them to exercise discretion and to withhold votes for Biden.
And Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us.
It should not be a rubber stamp process and an expectation that we're certifying an election.
If this election were overturned, our democracy would enter a death spiral.
If you're a political player that wanted to steal an election, there are people to lean on at every stage of the process. The national certification is done by Congress and chaired by the Vice President, partisan. The Secretary of State oversees elections in each state, along with state elections boards, also partisan. There are supervisors at the county level, sometimes appointed, sometimes elected, almost always partisan. And election law is set by the partisan state legislatures.
It's very odd to see the chief election officer of the state might be the honorary co-chair of a Democratic or Republican presidential candidates committee.
That is not how it works in Australia.
I like the fact that Australia makes it easy for people to get on the voter rolls. I like the fact that Australia votes on a day off. I like the fact that Australia has a system that really turns Election Day into a national holiday.
I think you all have 100% voting in Australia, right? And it's mandatory, and you have days off so you can go vote. That's a dream for us.
Having a voice and a vote in terms of elections administration, representing millions of Georgians that vote for the Republican candidates statewide, I think actually introduces a sense of fairness in that the political parties are not locked out of this process.
And if you're asking if I thought the election was stolen in 2020, I have a lot of doubts about the authenticity and of the 2020 elections. But what I'm here to tell you is I'm not looking to go backwards. I'm looking to go forward.
Thanks. Good morning. I'm Jeff Newlin, and I'm running as Republican for State Senate.
And he's running in a deeply blue part of Atlanta. Jeff Newlin's got a challenge ahead of him, differentiating himself from Donald Trump in the eyes of voters.
Usually the folks I get want to talk about the economy. They want to talk about, if they're presidential minded, they want to talk about Trump, pro or con, like the gentleman that we just talked to, right? He wanted to know how Trump was doing in Georgia.
The election integrity issue has been a big one for the party. Do you think voters pay much attention or care much about that?
I think I think they care, but I don't think they think it's a problem as much as when you get inside politics in the party, it's much more of an issue. What I do get from folks is they do. I'll get asked. I said, "Do you think the election was stolen?" And I always answer and said, "Joe Biden was elected president, so that was the outcome." That's
not really an answer to the question, though.
That was the outcome, and so I don't know if it was stolen or not.
While Jeff isn't sure, many of his colleagues are convinced, and they've made changes. Georgia passed new electoral rules in 2021, a law Republicans called the Election Integrity Act.
It's been a feature of American election law, especially since the disputed 2000 election, to see states changing election rules in the name of election integrity, but they're really about trying to get some benefit.
I was censured in 2021 and then not reappointed. I came out on the side of the Democratic opposition to the so-called Elections Integrity Act of 2021.
It made big changes to early voting rules, limited the number of mail ballot drop boxes, and gave more power to state-level officials to overrule county administrators.
Political experts say the 95-page measure is a complete overhaul of the state's election process.
Every election from now on is going to be ethically and legally conducted.
The new law was interpreted by Democrats as an attempt at making it harder to vote in areas where Democrats do well. They saw it as voter suppression. Georgia's most populated county, and one of its bluest, went from having 38 ballot drop boxes in 2020 to at most 8 now.
Georgia's new controversial election law is facing legal challenges and gaining national attention.
It's anti-democratic. It's un-American.
There was a lot of gaping holes that we realized that were breakdowns in processes and procedures and opportunities for cheating.
We are very, very concerned. We're watching, we're making phone calls, we're calling the governor's office, we're making sure that our representatives are there at the Capitol letting them know that we think that these rules are unfair.
I talk to people every day who are so discouraged about our elections process that they indicate to me they may not vote. And so I think that would be a tremendous failure of American democracy.
In America, election rules are often changed along partisan lines. The goalposts can be shifted. And in 2024, rules are being changed just weeks from Election Day.
We see a lot of gaming, and all of that gaming created the conditions, I think, where people were willing to accept this idea that if my side won, the election was fairly conducted. If the other side won, there must have been something wrong with how the election was conducted. And I think Trump supersized that idea.
By removing the fraud, Donald Trump won.
Since the last election, Republicans have gained a 3-2 majority on Georgia's state elections board. The trio welcomed warmly by the former president.
Pit bulls fighting for honesty, transparency, and victory. They're fighting.
And unafraid to wield its power. In August, passing new rules to give local county election boards the powers to launch investigations before they certify results.
That's generally not the role of these boards. If there's a problem with how an election is conducted, there are procedures under state law for filing an election contest to get supervised by a court. So this is just injecting a whole new body into the process in a way that is unfamiliar and in a way that's coming very late in the process.
And more rules were passed in September, just weeks before Election Day, including one that forces all counties to hand count voting slips to ensure they have the correct number of them, a change that frustrated county officials.
The idea that you're not going to listen to the individuals that are charged with conducting elections is absurd to me.
Board members disregarding even their own lawyers.
We'll be going against the advice of our legal counsel by voting in the affirmative.
Critics say it's more likely to introduce errors into the count than reduce them, and could create problems with chain of custody procedures for ballots.
This country that was built on the rule of law all of a sudden is facing the possibility that partisan passions really can affect our electoral outcomes.
So there are two battles going on here. A battle over whether the election will be conducted fairly and whether the result will be accepted, and a battle over who can vote and how. American history is littered with examples of people in power denying some people the right to vote or making it as hard as possible for some people to exercise their right. In the early decades of the nation, voting was restricted to white property owners. Some states only allowed Christians to vote. Women couldn't vote until the 20th century.
When the United States was created, it was never really thought of as a democracy because that was something of a dirty word at the time. There was a lot of fear of the rule of common people, and there was a sense that common people couldn't make their own decisions, especially if they didn't own land.
After the Civil War, and as the civil rights movement was growing, many states put in place barriers to voting.
Growing up in Birmingham, black citizens were not allowed to even register to vote.
Some southern states, including Georgia, imposed literacy tests for some voters. Those some were people who couldn't prove they had a 5th grade education and tended to be minorities. Here was one given in Louisiana in 1964, just 60 years ago. You had 10 minutes to answer 30 questions. To pass, you had to get every single one correct. Question 1, draw a line around the number or letter of this sentence. Question 15, write the word noise backwards and place a dot over what would be its second letter should it have been written forward. Question 20, spell backwards forward. Question 27, write right from the left to the right, as you see it spelled here. Question 29, write every other word in this first line and print every third word in same line, original type smaller, and first line ended at comma, and capitalise the 5th word that you write. What does that even mean? The questions were designed to trick you. Some have multiple interpretations with seemingly multiple valid answers. And the person who judged if you were correct was the person administering the test.
We had to resort to national action to end discrimination, the virtual exclusion of black voters in many southern states from roughly the 1890s until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed.
The Voting Rights Act prohibited rules that denied any citizen the right to vote on account of race or colour. It was designed to undo discriminatory practices in the South.
You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
Ministers' homes, churches of ministers that were involved in trying to get this passed were bombed. People were killed.
It banned literacy tests and required governments with a history of discrimination to get approval before changing voting rules, known as pre-clearance.
We cannot, we must not refuse to protect the right of every American to vote in every election that he may desire to participate in.
However, ever since that got passed, there are agents who have been trying to unravel that.
In 2013, the Supreme Court weighed in and reinterpreted elements of the law, including that pre-clearance or pre-approval requirement.
That pretty much crippled the Voting Rights Act.
Very quickly, several states changed their voting rules. Mississippi and Alabama started enforcing photo ID laws that had been previously blocked by pre-clearance. North Carolina reduced early voting and eliminated same-day voter registration. And a Texas voter ID law that had been on the books but not enacted went into effect.
Some of these laws have been almost laughably obvious in the intent they have. In Texas, they passed a law requiring voter identification where you could use your concealed carry permit for a gun as an election ID, but students at public state universities could not use their IDs issued by government through the state. They couldn't use those IDs to go to the polls. You wonder, who are they trying to get to vote and for whom are they trying to make it participation harder?
Even though it's been 60 years, we know that the fight still continues.
The fight continues in this office in Atlanta. Where Get Out the Vote group Georgia Stand Up is preparing voter care packs for Election Day and reaching out to black voters across the state.
These are generational folks that their family, their grandmother, their grandfather, great-grandfather might have picked cotton, but now they're picking presidents, and maybe presidents that look like them.
White Americans are more likely to vote than people of colour. Over the past 3 elections, 43% of white adults voted each and every time. Just 27% of black voters did the same.
If you look at the history of the U.S. Electoral system, it was always set up for black and brown people to be disengaged and not in the system, going back to it being a 3/5 of a human being. So we know every time black people have tried to register to vote, particularly in the U.S. South, there's always been barriers.
My name is Cynthia. I'm calling from Georgia Stand Up. How are you doing today?
The group is calling voters to check they're registered to vote.
That is correct. And if you go there, you can actually check your registration status right there and find out what polling station you go to.
First, when we're talking to voters, we're first asking, are they registered to vote and are they still registered to vote? Because what we're finding is that people are being purged off the list without their consent. So we need them to make sure they're still on the rolls.
Ensuring that we have checks and balances in place ensures that we have elections that we can trust and verify. I feel like if you single out a particular part of the population and suggest that they're incapable of having an ID, that is actually pretty racist. I find it to be incredibly insulting. Every American should have an ID.
So on one hand, you've got people, mainly Republicans, who think that elections are stolen. On the other, you've got mainly Democrats who think people are being denied their rights to participate freely in elections.
Voters of both parties strongly support democracy. They like our democratic system. They want it to succeed. And yet members of both parties are convinced that the other side is determined to take down democracy, undermine it.
Setting aside the merits of their arguments and who's in the right on these questions, my question is, do the facts even matter? Can a democracy function if people don't think it's fair?
What I want Georgians to say on November 6th is this was a fair election, and it's an election that they can have confidence in the outcome. And I believe we're well on our way to achieving that.
So if Republicans, if Donald Trump doesn't carry the state in November, are you confident enough in the processes now that you think everyone would accept that?
Well, I think if the rules that have been proposed for adoption by the State Elections Board are followed, along with all other Georgia election laws, then yes, I think people will be able to have confidence regardless of the outcome. Now, obviously, if we have a very close election, then we have procedures for that.
He's confident this election will be fair if the rules that were put in place by Republicans are all followed and the election isn't close. So not exactly caveat-free. This tension where both sides think their opponents are undermining elections, could that itself be the biggest threat to elections here?
Political scientists have this concept called loser's consent. What makes a democracy? It's that the losers agree that the election was fairly conducted. They're not happy about the result, they grumble about it, but they agree to organize and fight for next time. When you lose loser's consent, you've lost your democracy.
Most Republicans think the 2020 election was stolen. Has the US already lost loser's consent?
Well, first I'd say that just because Republicans tell pollsters they believe the 2020 election was stolen doesn't mean they actually believe it. It's become a thing that you say, especially something you might say to a pollster who's part of the media. So I'm hopeful that some of this is cheap talk. It's not really what people believe.
The problem that is that the distrust that you are seeing taking place, it hasn't peaked, it hasn't climaxed yet.
You're saying it will get worse before it gets better?
That's right. Yep. So I'm thinking about moving back to Australia or up to Vancouver.
Seriously?
Yeah. If you guys can, yes. I'm serious.
It's not an ideal situation. It is certainly not the election system that I would design. My hope is that we're going to be able to muddle through.
Muddle through. I don't know. Maybe there are loftier goals to reach for? Coming up, redrawing the map with a stroke of the pen. Voters pick their politicians, but in America,
the politicians get to pick the voters.
Parties can tilt the scale in their favour. Incumbents can make it easier for themselves to stay in a job by gerrymandering their districts. That's next time on America. Are you okay?